Okay, so last week I was talking to somebody about writing modules that pass containers, like chain together a container into another container, because the ability to chain together Dagger modules is one of the most powerful concepts that we have. But I wasn't able to quite like properly show a good example. So right now we're going to try to show that in Go specifically. I think we have a good module to try this with. Basically, I just need any module that returns a container should be a good enough example. But I really want one that's running Go. And ideally one that's not like doing anything too crazy. So this might be a good example, is the MariaDB module, because basically all it does is it returns a container with some version of MariaDB and an exposed port. So let's try that. But I'm going to go ahead and open this up in its own kind of instance of VS Code, because otherwise there's just like, I haven't quite gotten go.work to work exactly how I wanted to in my thing. So this will be easier to play with here. And I'll zoom in just a bit. Okay, so what we want to basically be able to do is write some other function that takes a container as an argument, and like chain and be able to basically chain these things together. So we'll write that here. We'll give it just some silly name. So this will take the context and it'll take a container. I think that needs to be a pointer. Okay, and then it returns a container as well. Do I need the Dagger dot? Oh, yeah, I don't think I need that. I think that's just given to me. Okay, cool. So, and then all we're gonna do, so basically this function takes a container and then it returns a container, right? So we'll return container dot standard out, given the context. I'm just joking about that. We'll return the container dot with exec. We'll execute some function. Like for example, we'll execute MySQL version. Is that a command? I really don't know what I'm doing. There we go, hold on. It's like that. Okay. So we'll return the container with exec. That returns a container, and then like I want the standard out, but I can get that myself. I don't actually need the context in that case. All I really need is this with exec, and I can grab the standard out myself from. I can grab the standard out myself through the chaining process, right? So theoretically, what I should be able to do now is like call this function, but then use this function as an argument into that function. right? So if I say Dagger functions, that should print out all the things that the MariaDB module can do. So if I call chain, so Dagger call chain, that accepts a container argument. Right? So I should be able to then say Dagger call chain with the container and then pass into that container base. And base does not have any required arguments. So that should just work. But it doesn't. Huh? Docker. It says that access was denied from Docker Hub. This feels like a network issue though. Docker base latest. Oh, is it because base is somehow special? Yeah. It feels like maybe base is some special thing. Hold on 1 sec. Let me just pull. Just in case anybody actually shows up. Okay. Okay. All right. Let's start again. So if I say Dagger call base, it'll return. It should return a MariaDB container, right? And I can even say with exec. I can even say with exec and pass in some arguments like MariaDB, or let's say MySQL version. Oh, sorry. With exec takes an argument called args. This might just be a bad example. Potentially. Let's get into a terminal in there and see what we can do. Yeah, there's a strange thing with like the MariaDB containers. Like they don't actually provide like a client, I think. Like is this, I guess it's installed. I'm just trying to call the help to see like, is there just a thing that tells me like the client version or something? Like all I want to do is something simple. V, yeah, just big V. MariaDB big V. Okay, perfect. Okay, So all I want to do is basically call that and say big V. But why is it trying to connect to the server? That doesn't make any sense. Am I confused? Oh, I think we need to override the entry point. So maybe this wasn't the best example, because like this is again like a special, it's like some special thing. It has its own entry point. Like it does all kinds of stuff. Okay. Well, when I have the with entry point, it's the same. Yeah. So it just says entry point to use for future executions. Okay. So let's just try that. Instead of saying with exec, we'll try with entry point. Okay, perfect. And then I'll say standard out. Ugh. So strange. Oh. This might just not be the best example, to be honest. What if we just started like a... Actually, no. Let's get this to work. Like, there's no reason why this shouldn't work. So let's just figure it out. Okay. So, what are we doing wrong here? It's trying to connect to the local server instead of running the version command. And it feels like there's like this extra space. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe I need to make sure there's no extra space. Of course. Yeah, so there's like an extra space. So you just gotta be careful. Like if you're passing in with exec or with entry point, you gotta make sure that it's just like it's basically you take whatever command you were gonna run in your shell, and then you remove all surrounding spaces, and then you put every individual kind of token in a comma separated fashion like this. So the with entry point thing is probably a moot point. I think if we said with exec, it would have also worked. Let's just double check that. All right, perfect. So what have we done here? We took a command, a container, and then we chained on a different command, passing in. So we take the container, and then it returns a container. Then we call the next function that also returns a container. So I think the issue is we don't necessarily need to pass in. No, I think I think the problem is like these are all built-in things, so you can't necessarily reason about them the same way that I'm trying to in my head. But what do we even do the first time? I see. You can't. It seems like it doesn't quite work the way I'm thinking about it. like it's almost like I want to call. It's almost like I want to chain, like call again. But I don't think I can do that. I don't think it's possible. That's not a thing that we can do. So let's go read the docs, see what they say about this. And I'm not quite sure if this is even in the docs, but functions and chain. Okay. It must be here, right? So Dagger functions can return basic types or objects. Objects can redefine their own functions. So this is function chaining, core feature of Dagger. So this should work, I think, the way that I am thinking about it, right? Yeah. So when a Dagger function returns a core type like a directory, then you can continue the chain by calling a function from that type. But in this case, we want to chain and chain and chain and chain and then do something. So like the thing we showed earlier was an example of this chain. So this is chaining, right? So this function returns a container type. Container type has a property of with exec. That returns another container type, which has a property of std out, and that finally returns a string. But right, so you can imagine like an imaginary pipe there, and then an imaginary pipe there. So we're basically piping the output of this command into this command into this block, and then taking that and putting it into this block. I guess and that's the way that I would think about it. But it seems that we can't use like the output as like an argument. Like the arg can't be potentially the output of a previous function. I really kind of want to maybe better understand how these things actually work. Like, how are these functions, if they are functions, the same way implemented? That seems to be like the missing link in my head. But let's look at some of these examples. So this one takes this is a simple example, right? And this kind of does what we just did. This one prints the contents of a file, change file to contents. Okay, publish with label. So like that all makes sense. Like all that makes sense, except it's like one layer. I want to go 2 layers. Can I? Let's take a look at Solomon's project. right? So this totally says that we can do what we're trying to do, right? Because a container is not just a string referencing an image. It's the state of a container managed by the Dagger engine. Passed into a Dagger's function code as if it was another variable. So why doesn't that actually work the way I want it to? Does that mean like we need to like export the thing first? Like if you have to export the thing first, then it makes it slightly less powerful. So the question that we want to answer is it possible to pass container argument where the argument is a Dagger function call that returns a container type? I know this has been a pretty meandering like thought here for the last 20 minutes, but it's nice to be able to actually articulate that question succinctly. Right? So, question. Is it possible to pass in a container argument I'm going to ask that question in our Discord. And then once we get the answer to that question, we'll follow up here. Instead of freestyling, why don't we copy this question that we just wrote? Like all this makes so much sense through the SDK, right? Because if we wrote a function that takes container like this, I could call that function like this. Test container chains. We'll call this test. In fact, it doesn't take any arguments. This just returns container, right? And in this case, I could call this function just like this. Return, I'll return chain, and then m.chain will take m.base. Huh? Oh, yeah, this gets kind of strange. Because these are optional. There's no such thing as optional in Go for real. So optional is really for the purpose of the CLI, I guess, generated. But we still have to pass in the arguments that we want. So let's just do that real quick. Okay, so I can call this just like this, and it should work. Let's try it. We just had the wrong commands there. Okay. So that works exactly how we expect it to, right? But through the CLI, I can't seem to get it to work. But it must be possible, because this, like the CLI and the SDK are all just writing like GraphQL query. So it must be possible to do this. I just can't seem to figure it out. But it feels like the same issue as earlier today, where like I was thrown off by how you pass in arguments to with exec. And it was something silly, right? And this feels like it's just as silly. Like this must be possible. I'm gonna use something really stupid, but just in case. We'll try that. Oh wow. No, that didn't actually work. But it looked like it was about to work. But it didn't actually work. I'm just gonna keep doing stupid things like this. Like, what does that do? These are just weird bash tricks. I don't know. No, that doesn't actually work. It doesn't actually work, of course. But like it kind of works. Like it does stuff. It does stuff, but it doesn't actually pass in the result into container, which is what I wanted to do. Did someone already ask this by chance? You can't pass functions as arguments yet. Okay, well, there goes our there goes the answer. Okay, so I think I'm just wrong. So it's interesting because it seems like you can't do this right now, but it's striking to me because like it is totally possible to do it through the SDK. So it feels like it should be totally possible to do it through the CLI, but it feels, but this might be just an area where there is still a little bit of a difference. Which is awesome, by the way, because I remember Solomon talking about this, but I didn't fully understand until just now when I needed to do this thing. Let me just copy the link to that. I'm still going to ask the question because I think it's worth asking. Okay, so I apologize in advance to the person that I told that this would work. I was 0 for 2 that day because there's another thing which we're going to talk about next that's related to this, but not quite the same. Anyways, we'll put a pin in this for now because it seems like it's not possible. And let's move on to trying the other thing that we said was also possible. So the other thing that we talked about was, let me stash this while we're here too. I just don't want to save any of the changes that happened there. So let's go back here. Okay. So the other thing that we were working on was this flipped module, and oops, I wasn't. But it doesn't really matter. Like flipped isn't the point here. The point here is that, I mean, I think maybe even a different example could be open tofu, because, and this is old. This is very, very old code. I'm not even sure if this works right now. Like, this is like the very first thing I wrote before I really knew how anything actually worked. It takes a bunch of yeah, this is definitely not going to work. But the core idea is the same, where instead of trying to implement every single thing that this CLI does, I've had this thing in mind where it was basically like a wrapper around any arbitrary like CLI that you might have. And for some CLIs, Like let's take a look at OpenTofu, for example. Like there's 2, 4, 6, 10, 12. Like there's like 20 different commands, right? Apply, console, destroy, end, format, etc. Right? And these also take other arguments, I think. Right? I'm assuming they do. I'm assuming they take other arguments. So the idea here is that instead of like re-implementing every single thing that this CLI can do as a Dagger function, which is probably like the right thing to do long term, but that might take weeks, right, of work, days or weeks of work. It would be nice if we could just create like a very thin wrapper around the CLI. And the benefit of doing that is mostly around the idea that I can use this command line program without having any dependencies installed on my computer except for Docker or some OCI compatible runtime and the Dagger CLI. So that's like the main reason why a thin wrapper is better than just the standard CLI program, because you can know that if you're writing some internal documentation for your team or whatever, you don't have to worry about anything that they may or may not have installed on their computer. It doesn't matter what version of the OS they're using or what shell they're using. Like everything will just work exactly how you describe it. So there is a lot of benefit for kind of CLI maintainers to create these thin wrappers with Dagger. But the challenge is for some of these like wrappers, they're incredibly thin, where you just pass in a string argument and Dagger will execute it and return the output, and that's great. But for others, you're going to want to have additional parameters. So it's not just going to be like Dagger call. And by the way, like the interface here is not like the prettiest thing in the world. Like it's definitely a work in progress to improve this DX, but like it's not just enough. It's not going to be enough to say Dagger call, run, command, login, right? Because this has to be a string of arguments. As soon as you want to do other things other than hard-coded string, so for example, I hope there's an example. Apply, I'm assuming takes a plan file. Perfect, right? So apply. You want to apply some file, but that file you might want to get, you might want to pass in using like the Dagger file type or something like that. Just as an example. And if you want to do that now, like you can't just do that in this code. Like there's no way to like shell out right here and say Dagger stuff, right? And that's kind of what we want to be able to do. And it seems like until we're able to do that, like the thin wrapper can only ever accept like fully qualified kind of hard-coded string arguments. You can never accept anything dynamic, which is, I think, still is better than nothing, but definitely is not as great as what I was hoping for. And the specific scenario that we ran into last week was I want to run a command with an argument, and this argument expects some file to exist like right there when it runs. And if only I could chain some other function that generates that file and then run this function, I would be in business. But unfortunately, it turns out that you cannot like prepend chained arguments. That might be very confusing. So let's go back to our friendly Discord. Thank you, Solomon. This will be possible one day soon, and I can't wait. So that's great. But let's go back to the example. I think I put in developers. Wait, oh, sorry. I do mean that. It's going to be a game changer, so I can't wait for that. Okay, wait. This might have actually been in like a separate private area, which I don't want to necessarily share here right now. I'm not really sure how to illustrate what I'm trying to do cleanly. So I think what we should do is just start a new module and illustrate my points. When in doubt, start a new module. I already have like a little special spot for this, my little scratch pen. And let's use Python just for fun. Call pre-chain. All right, so we're basically making a new module, pre-chain, with Python, and it's just going to illustrate some of these points and hopefully get us to a spot where we can at least demonstrate like a workaround for now, and then aim towards this beautiful future where we can prepend chained functions. So the other benefit here is we're going to learn how to work with Python. So I'm going to open this directory in VS Code, and the first thing I'm going to do is create a virtual environment. We do have a git ignore that doesn't include virtual environments, so I'll add that there. But so the reason why I'm doing all this is because I want to get all the nice SDK type hints and stuff like that to work. So in order to do that, you create a virtual environment, you pip install editable Dagger/SDK. That will install all of those beautifully generated code gen files into our current environment. So now when we work with Dagger functions, any Dagger specific things, we get all of these lovely type hints in our IDE. So that's wonderful. Okay, so pre-chain is like, this is just a sample module, and we're working towards creating a CLI wrapper. Maybe I should have called this like a wrapper, because that's kind of what it does. But anyways, so in this generic CLI wrapper, we have a function. It's called run. It accepts an arbitrary command, and it returns a container. And I always recommend, as much as possible, to return a container type, because a container type can do so many things. Let me illustrate what I mean by that. This is very silly because all it does is return latest outline. But container types are magical. So if I say Dagger call run help, you'll see that because I'm returning a container, I can do all of these things. Like, containers can do magical things. You can run them as services, you can grab standard out from them, you can export them, import them, you can mount stuff, you can open up a terminal inside, you can run it as a service. Like, there's so many things you can do with containers. But if I return a string, and in this case, the container has like standard out is a string at the end, right? And it has to be async. So, because this is a coroutine. If I return a string, then you'll see that strings can't really do anything. Like, they can be printed out. That's about it. Or if I return a directory, right? Let's go ahead and import that. Dagger Dagger.directory. Directories. This may not actually work because I don't think this returns a directory. It's gonna complain. Oh, okay. So directories can do some stuff, right? But they can't do as much as containers, right? So anyways, hopefully this helps to illustrate how, like, ideally your functions are your like the high level, like, callable functions that you create should be as abstract as they possibly can be. And then you can compose together the more kind of complex things that you need to do. But creating functions that are abstract allows you to do so much more. As soon as you start to return, like, the final terminal type, then you know, you're limited in what you can do, and then you might find yourself writing, kind of like repeating yourself to write functions that do one little thing rather than composing things together. So if you can get away with it, you should always try to return a container. And then if you need to get the file, or if you need to get the standard out, you can either do that through the CLI, right? By saying Dagger call run, get standard out, right? Or get the directory, or like list directory, like you can still do all the things you were going to be able to do with those other types. Just grab them from, like, the container itself. But anyways, in this case, we have this container. And you know what? We're actually going to use this argument, right? So we're going to say with exec, and we're going to pass it this list of strings. We're going to execute. We're going to echo whatever was passed in. So this is our MVP here. It basically takes an argument and then returns that inside of the container. So let's just run that to make sure it works first. And it's going to complain the command's not set. So let's pass in command hello. And that worked. So let's grab the standard out. And we should see hello. Okay. So far we are in business. Now let's get something more interesting. Instead of saying, let's just something a little bit more interesting to illustrate what I was trying to say. So let's just ls. Let's just, like, list the whatever the current working directory is. So it looks like we're in, like, the root, and it has all of these different properties. Now, this is where we currently are operating. Now, imagine that, and let's start to clean this up just a little bit. So in Python, if you want to clean this up, you have to basically put your DAG thing inside of, I guess this would be a tuple or something, or fine, yeah. Maybe this is an anonymous function, I guess. But anyways, if we do that, then we can split this up nicely and look at it like this. Okay, so let's get rid of all this sample code too over here. Okay, so let's get into some directory. Never mind, it doesn't really matter. Okay. Okay, so this is where the current working directory is, and that's where you run ls. Now, imagine that I I was running some command line wrapper. I'm wrapping some CLI. In this case, it's called echo. And the command I passed was, I'm sorry, never mind. I don't know why I'm being so stupid. We don't even need the echo part. We just need this with exec to the command. So we're gonna execute whatever command we pass in. So this is a great example. So in here, I'll say ls. Perfect. So this is actually a great example, right? Because you can get pretty far with just like this model right here, right? And as long as like the arguments to that command, maybe I spoke too soon. I might need to pass in like SHC or something like that. I might need to create a shell. Let's try this one more time. I'll create a shell. Yeah. Let's try this. So this is going to execute whatever I pass in inside of a shell. All right, perfect. Okay, so we're inside of a shell. We execute whatever commands we pass in. Life is good. And as long as we're passing in like string arguments, then it's all good. It doesn't matter. But imagine that I wanted to like run this ls command inside of a directory that doesn't yet exist inside of this container, right? Because my CLI wrapper requires some additional files. How would we do that? If we were writing code, it was very simple because we would have a new argument called dir, and we would mount that dir, we would make it our work dir, and then we would execute all of our things. But we're not writing code. We want to do it as a consumer of this module, not as the producer of this module. So let's take off our kind of producer hat for a second and remember that we can't just write another function. We're consuming this module, so we have to just use whatever it gives us. And in this case, it doesn't give us anything. It just gives us this little thin wrapper. So that's the dilemma, right? Because I want to mount a directory and then run ls, but I can't really do that, even though it feels like you should be able to. And the reason why I can't do it is because there's no way to prepend like let's say like with directory or something like that. Because remember, Dagger call run returns a container, so we can chain things downstream, but we can't like chain things upstream. We can't like get it to do things before it runs itself. Right? What we want to be able to do is just say with mounted directory. And then run ls. But unfortunately, that's just not possible in the way that things work today, at least as far as I understand it. But let's try it. Let's try it theoretically and see what would happen. Because ideally, we want to be able to do this. Dagger call run, and we'll say with directory. Or better, yeah, with directory. So Dagger call run, command is not set. Command will just say ls. And that's kind of like the key issue, right? Is because out of the gate, we're kind of screwed. Because we can't just say Dagger with directory. That's not a thing as far as I know, right? So that's not possible. We could say Dagger call run, command is ls with directory. Is that going to work? I think it'll work, but it's not going to do what we want it to do. Because basically it returns the output of, it returns ls, and then because it's returning a container, you can chain it together and grab it and now mount a directory. So let's just do that just for fun and get as far as we can before this finally stops working. Right? So we can say, okay, so let's go ahead and pass in the directory. We're passing in the current directory, and we'll even say with work dir. Oh wait, sorry. With directory takes two arguments: directory and the path, right? Location of the written directory. So we'll call it temp. Right? Pre-chain. Like we're going to put it inside of temp pre-chain. It didn't like me making up an argument. Perfect. So we ran our function command ls with directory pre-chain. But the problem is when ls ran, it happened before the directory was mounted. So if we actually try to get the standard out here, I don't think it's going to do what we expect it to do. At least it didn't when we tried this last week. In fact, I'm not even sure if there is any standard out here. Just for fun, if I pass in ls temp, what's it going to see in there, if anything? Nothing. Which I expected. I expected it to see nothing. Okay. But all hope is not lost yet. And I totally understand that this is like not an ideal like developer experience, but just bear with me for one more second. What we want to be able to do is we'll say with workdir, oops, sorry, I don't need that. Let's scrub standard out. So now it'll execute it should execute whatever comes next. And that's the whole problem, right? We're chaining in one direction, we can't chain backwards. So in my perfect world, I would do all of this and then I would call this command. Right? But there's no real way to do that, unfortunately. There's no way to do that. And I think there should be. I think that if there was, this would be, even more powerful. But right now, there's no way to do it. So, one thing we could do though is instead of trying to do all this, we just keep wrapping. Like we basically literally just return like the CLI with its dependencies installed and all that stuff, and it's runtime. But you don't ever pass any arguments in. So it's like the dumbest possible function. It just returns a container with your dependencies. You never call with exec from here, but instead we call with exec from here. And then we should see the stuff inside of the work directory, hopefully. Oops, sorry, we need args. Now we see what we want to see. So that's the ultimate answer here is in a function that returns or that wraps some CLI, we kind of gotta like not even expose the command we're gonna run through that function, but instead use it as like simply the thing that creates the runtime environment that allows the CLI to execute, and then do everything else outside of that. So this would basically turn into this. And imagine that this was open tofu. In fact, let's just imagine this was open tofu. Let's bring this home and show the full kind of thing. So going back to our lovely open tofu example. We had this function that returned like open tofu. So we're just going to copy that basically, put it in here. And this would be like our new open tofu module. So grab Alpine and we'll execute some stuff. But in this case, we're not executing user input. We're just executing like some of the preamble that we're going to need to set up the environment. And these are like the old instructions from when OpenTofu first came out. I'm not sure if they've updated this, but hopefully it still works. Did I do something wrong here? I don't like that it's this white color. It's not usually a good sign. I'm not thrilled about what's happening here. Maybe there's something wrong with like my quotes or something. I don't know. Let's just try to keep going for a second. Install that. And then last but not least, we don't need to do that. Okay, cool. So what happens if I try to run that? Okay, I just completely forgot to do this core thing that's like required. All these need to be lists. That's why I was not happy. Now it's happy. Okay. So this should just return a container that contains OpenTofu. And now, going back to this whole thing, we're going to say OpenTofu version. I'm not sure if that's a command, but let's just assume it was. Remember, we're getting rid of this whole command thing. So. And I don't hate it, to be honest with you, especially because it makes sense logically in my mind that the final argument is like the thing you actually want to execute. So it's not the worst thing in the world. Let's actually learn. No, let's not give up yet. Let's get in there in a terminal. And that's the beauty of returning containers, right? Because I can just grab the terminal at the spot where I'm running into an issue and then try it myself. I don't have to go do anything else. It's really, really awesome. So I'm in the work that I expected. I see all my files. I'm very, very happy. And tofu version. Okay, so that's the thing I wanted. All right. So now going back to this one last time, we'll say tofu-version. And this is going to fail because remember, we have to pass in a list of arguments. So it has to be this. That. Tofu, comma, no space, dash version. Will give me open tofu. So that's the approach. If you're going to write a very thin Dagger module CLI wrapper for the purpose of mostly creating a portable runtime that anybody can execute your CLI without having to worry about any dependencies on a local machine, this is the way to do it for now. I think some improvements would be being able to basically prepend stuff into a Dagger function, because you can see how powerful the chaining is, right? But it only goes in one direction, and I think being able to go in kind of both directions would be very, very interesting. But this is the approach that we should take right now. Okay, so that was a pretty fruitful little session. We didn't write any modules, but I think we did a good job debugging some stuff. We learned, unfortunately, this passing a container as an argument, or sorry, passing a function as an argument is not yet supported, unfortunately, but it will be. It's coming soon, and I can't wait. I think it's going to be a huge benefit. And then we also learned that we can't prepend chained arguments into functions, but you can still create these thin wrappers. You just have to execute the command as using with exec. And I think I'm not necessarily I don't think it's the end of the world. I think this is a reasonable kind of place to be right now, with some room for improvement in the future. But I think that this really creates some nice abstractions if you want to just get started and get a working Dagger module that wraps any command line interface. This is the way to go, because we have basically now have full exposure to all of OpenTofu through the Dagger, CLI, or through any Dagger function in any language. Yes, the syntax isn't super clean looking, so I think there's definitely some room to improve that. But I think that the ability to basically create this thin wrapper with 10 lines of code is a pretty powerful concept. So hopefully that was helpful, and we'll continue our journey soon.